So my name's Samantha Prasser and I am a volunteer at the Young Australians in International Affairs, and you're joining us tonight for the Chat with a Diplomat event. So this is an initiative by the American Consulate General Sydney to connect young people in New South Wales and Queensland with senior American diplomats. So this event tonight is designed as an open dialogue between American diplomats in Australia, driven by the interests of the group. So a chat with a diplomat is a frank conversation on the relationship between Australia and the United States, US foreign policy and American culture. The United States Consulate General is proud to partner with the Young Australians in International Affairs to bring this event to you guys tonight. I would just like to introduce our wonderful panelists tonight, but before I hand over to them to introduce themselves, I would just like to note that we are very fortunate tonight to be joined with the two most senior female heads of the consulate in Sydney, and we all just find this really awesome given that international affairs and policy is such a male-dominated field. So thank you to our panelists, and I would like to hand over to the Consul General to introduce herself. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Samantha. It's really great to be here. I wish we could be doing this in person because I really enjoy these type of events when we're all in the same room together and can see each other. But under the circumstances, I really appreciate the ability for us to get together and to have this conversation. Thanks to so many people for tuning in for it. Look forward to your excellent questions. I believe you've had a chance to read my bio. In brief, this is my 8th overseas assignment for the United States State Department. I joined in 1993, shortly after finishing up my university degree and after spending 2 years in Japan, both teaching English and then working for a Japanese company. I've spent most of my time in 3 major regions of the world where US foreign policy is quite different, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I've done tours in Europe, very much focused on what our relationship with Russia, the independent countries that came out of the Soviet Union and relations with them. I've spent time in Southern Africa, where we spent a lot of time on health diplomacy, focused a lot of work on fighting HIV/AIDS. And so it's been interesting in today's context to recall initiatives that we did at that point that are still ongoing, many. And I've worked in South Asia, and in South Asia, looking a lot at the security threats that came out of Afghanistan and the efforts that were made there to overcome that and bring peace to that region, as well as to engage one of the world's most populous countries, India, and the tense relationship there with Pakistan. So really interesting and diverse mix. Some people in our business focus more on one region, but I've moved around a lot. And with that, I'll pass to my colleagues who have had different careers.
Thanks so much. You've also seen my name in bio, Elizabeth Power. I'm the newest of the 3 of us here in Sydney. I've only been in country since August. I came here from South Africa. And at both South Africa and here, my role is as the country consular coordinator. So I oversee passports and visas and services to US citizens here in Sydney, but also covering our consulates in Perth and Melbourne as well. I have also bounced around a little bit in my career, although this is my first time in Asia. And I have most of my postings in Latin America, in Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay, and in Africa, Nigeria, Lesotho, and South Africa. I'm really happy to be here in Sydney.
Hi everyone, I'm Donald Maynard, and my role at the consulate in Sydney is as the head of public affairs, which means I deal with media relations and with putting together events like today where we get the opportunity to speak directly with the Australian public. As Elizabeth just outlined, our careers take us around the world. I've worked in Brazil, a couple of different tours in Baghdad, London, New Delhi, Paris, where I worked at the United States Permanent Delegation to UNESCO, and here in Sydney. Just very happy to be here and looking forward to the chance to talk with you all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Consul General and Elizabeth and Donald, for your introductions. It's great to have you guys all here tonight. So I guess we'll kick off and start the pre-submitted questions from the audience. So we'll start with you, Consul General, with a very timely question. How can Australia and the United States work together to reshape the concept of security issues reflecting on COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, obviously very timely with us doing this virtually as well. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on the way the world interacts, and we're in the middle of figuring that out moving forward. What I will emphasize in terms of the United States and Australia is that we have such a strong and deep and old historical relationship that we are able to go into this international crisis as friends and partners and allies from a very strong foundation. And that's a good thing. That makes us much better, in a better starting position in order to approach the crisis and approach the follow-on effects as partners together. To highlight the position that I'm in right now, that I'm very honored to hold as U.S. Consul General in Sydney, is our oldest continuously operating consulate position in this region, in the Asia Pacific region. And certainly within Australia, we had our first Consul General arrive here in 1836. The relationship at that point was very much based on trade. And I would emphasize that that is an area that we continue to have an extremely strong relationship on and in right now. And the companies, our companies, your companies on both sides of the Pacific Ocean are focused on how do we get through this crisis, this health emergency, and come out of it strong. Because a big part of security, going back to your question, is the economics. And our leaders are talking about that. In addition to the health issues, there's the economic issues, people's prosperity. How do we get it going again? On the strict security side, in terms of military and defense, again, we are allies. We work so closely together. Our militaries are talking constantly. Just within our consular district here, which covers New South Wales and Queensland, we have nearly 70 US military officers embedded in Australian military units, and they work perfectly as a part of the team, equally of those Australian units, equally Australian military over in the United States, part of the team. We share more information with Australia than almost any other country. And from that, we build mutual security goals, we have exercises, and we work to ensuring peace in this region.
Thank you, Consul General. I'd like to move more into the Asia space and kind of direct this question to you, Elizabeth. So the question is, what role do you see Australia and New Zealand playing in the Asia sphere to support its neighbours in the region?
Well, we actually saw a really great example of this just in the last few weeks during the current crisis, as we saw travelers who needed to get out of different Pacific islands needed to transit Australia and New Zealand to get back to their home countries. And despite the travel restrictions that were already in place in Australia and New Zealand, those evacuation flights were allowed to proceed because of the recognition by both of those countries that they need to support the Pacific Islands a little bit better. They also sent those planes to pick up the evacuees, complete with donated medical equipment. And Donald was a part of that effort, helping to make sure that those flights were able to come and go as they were planned to. I think more broadly, we've seen good examples of both Australia and New Zealand collaborating with their island neighbors on things like climate change mitigation. And I know there's a multi-year ongoing effort to help those spots that are going to be hit hardest by climate change to adapt to that challenge and meet that challenge head on, as well as health system strengthening, tourism efforts. There's collaboration across a whole range of issues, and I think that will absolutely continue into the future.
Thank you. So moving more back into US-Australian relations, I'll direct this question to you, Consul General. What are some of the emerging trends that could affect US and Australian business and or government relationships?
Yes, that's a very good question. And it's something that we spend a lot of time speaking with the Australian government about as well, and also with businesses. I just this morning did a virtual call with the American Chamber of Commerce, which is the headquartered here in Sydney, and with the Board of Governors and the new chairman of the board, talking very much about what do we see coming up? What are the big issues? Broadly, more broadly than just the current situation, technology and technological developments is an absolutely critical one. We've been spending a lot of time discussing the implementation of 5G and how that will go. That is something that you will have seen a lot of media about. We are very concerned that when 5G comes in, because of the way it will revolutionize our lives and coordinate the flow of information, we want to make sure that it's secure, that we can know that our data will be kept private or not be violated, that we will have choice and control over it. And we think that whoever the vendors are have to be trusted vendors, and that we have to be able to move forward, especially as allies and with like-minded countries, to do this in a way that gives our people assurances and really reinforces our national security. So that's one issue for sure that we're all talking about right now, would be technology. In other fields, we're looking very much at supply chains, and that's something that people are talking about a lot right now. For businesses, they want to know that they have a diversity of supply chains that will guarantee continuous business despite what might be happening in other realms, such as politics or anything along those lines. And so we promote a diversified supply chain, the ability to continue your business separate from any disputes that might be happening on the political level or somewhere else in geopolitics. And so that is something where we have an ongoing dialogue, and we take it very, very seriously. And I would say that Australia and the United States are very much in sync on that one.
Thank you, Consul General. Donald, I'd like to direct a question your way. Again, timely with a COVID-19 question, but in your capacity as diplomats, how do you respond to criticism of the president's approach to managing the COVID-19 crisis?
Right, so it's nothing new to see criticism of a president or a prime minister. And in fact, I've worked now for 3 different presidents during my career. I think Consul General might be up to 5 presidents. I'm not sure. 4, just 4. Okay. So it is not unusual to see criticism of world leaders. And of course, the United States is a big target, and the president of the United States is often criticized. How do we deal with the criticism? Most of the criticism that we're seeing right now in the press or that we see online is of American domestic politics and decisions that relate to domestic issues in the US. And one of the things that I think is amazing about the United States is we do all of this in the public square, which makes us much more available for public criticism. We have broad shoulders and thick skin, but we're happy to do this out in public. And I think you would see a lot of Americans are critical of this president. A lot of Americans were critical of President Obama and President Bush before Obama was the president. So it's something that we deal with when it's related to domestic politics. It doesn't really come into our sphere professionally. When we see the criticism more relevant to foreign policy issues, then that's something that we concentrate on. And our job as diplomats is to promote the policy of the president who's been elected by the American people under our Constitution. And that's what we do every day.
Awesome. Thank you, Donald. I'll put a question back to you, Consul General. Have you had a situation where you, kind of tying into the question that I asked Donald, have you had a situation where your personal views have conflicted with those of your government, and how did you handle that situation?
Always a challenging question. This could come up in any profession, frankly, where we are looking at changes in the world and things that we believe in strongly. Following on what Donald said, I have worked for 4 different administrations, 2 Democrat and 2 Republican. and certainly have my own views, and I vote and follow domestic politics very carefully, but I keep that separate from my job. We are very clear that when we are overseas representing the United States, we are on duty all the time, and we are speaking as professional representatives of the United States and not as individuals expressing individual opinions. What I will say in terms of when we do disagree with a policy, there's actually a process internally that we can go through if it's on a specific policy that we really feel compelled to speak out against. There is a thing called the dissent channel, which is a way of sending a formal written dissenting opinion back to the department, and it gets looked at. You write up, here's a policy I don't agree with, and here's why, and here's what I propose. Send it in through this channel as a cable, and it gets reviewed by policymakers, and it is protected. This is a formal mechanism whereby you get to express a dissenting opinion and not have retribution or be punished or anything like that. And in fact, every year we have awards given out for the best dissent channel cables that come in. And one of my colleagues, when I worked in Zimbabwe, he had won that award a couple years before when he had been in Addis Ababa. Very articulate, incredibly smart political officer. He's now been a deputy chief of mission twice. He won that award. It was very clear, but he also made the decision to stay with the Foreign Service. He felt his opinion had been listened to. In terms of me personally going through that, I have not sent anything through the dissent channel, but when I have had a disagreement about policy, I generally have discussed it with superiors or people in the organization. And then we come to an agreement, because ultimately we are here to carry out the policy of this administration or this leader, whether Secretary of State or Assistant Secretary. There should be a fulsome discussion of experts. You would make an agreement on a policy, and then it's our job to carry it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Consul General. That's actually really interesting. I did not know that that process existed. I have a question now for Elizabeth, kind of piggybacking off my previous question. So what qualities do you believe are inherent among all successful diplomats?
Well, I think there's three that are really important. The first one is no surprise, and that is flexibility. You know, as you've heard from the three of us, we never know from really one year to the next what location we'll be in, what issues we'll be working on, what languages we might be required to learn, where we might have to pull up our families and shuttle them off to next. And so you really do have to be flexible in that sense. I would say the other two big ones are communication. So being able to communicate clearly, concisely, always with the goal of two-way understanding. You can't effectively negotiate, you can't effectively lobby for your position, or bring somebody around to your position if you're not able to communicate well. And that two-way communication is really important. Building along those lines, this, I would say, is the most important, and that's the ability to build relationships. And I would say that every political or policy level success that I have had in my career was because I was able to effectively build a relationship with my interlocutor, whether it was somebody that I had worked over months or sometimes even years if they were particularly old and crusty, to get onto my side, to build a relationship with them first, and then we were able to make some policy changes. Sometimes it's a much quicker relationship. You know, I'm able to find a way to make a quick connection with somebody and use that as a springboard for getting them to take some action on my behalf, for example, or agree to a change that we think is really important at a policy level. So communication, flexibility, building good relationships, those are the three keys that I see.
Great, that's cool. Okay, moving back into kind of the Asia sphere again, Consul General, in what ways will the politics of bipolarity within foreign affairs be altered due to China's role in the COVID-19 outbreak?
this is going to be a real topic to watch, I think, as we move forward on this. The United States has been very clear in our position that we do not feel that China has been forthcoming in giving information about COVID-19 initially through the agreed upon and established multinational process with the World Health Organization. There is an established process that we all agreed to many years ago that when something of this nature begins to break, the country in which it is breaking has a set of criteria and information that it should send to the WHO, the WHO, and that then allows countries to analyze it and try to get ahead of it. We do not believe that China did this in a timely fashion, and to this day, they are not sharing all of the information that health officials believe is necessary in order to properly analyze the virus and try to get to the bottom of where it came from. This is a brand new virus. We do not know very much about it. The scientists are working 24 hours a day to try and figure it out, how it impacts on our system and how it transmits to others. We need a lot of information in order to do that properly and get ahead of it. And we do not feel as though China has shared that information to the extent that they can. And so while we encourage the Chinese government to do that, and we would like to see more of that, that has not started the process in the most positive way. I would also say that, you know, the Australian government has been calling for an investigation into this as well, in terms of let's find out, we want more information about where the virus started and how, et cetera. And that has created recently in the last week some real tension, where the Chinese ambassador in Canberra has come out and been highly critical of that initiative, which is again creating tension. All of that I think we will see play out going forward. It is important. All of our countries are critical countries in this region. Australia plays a very strong leadership role in the Asia Pacific region, and certainly within the Pacific region itself. The US and Australia have a very critical relationship. They are our largest trading partner, the same as they are Australia's largest trading partner. This is an essential relationship. We have to work it out. But it is definitely something that will require a lot of attention from both diplomats and political leaders, and I would argue the scientists on all sides.
Thanks, Consul General. Yeah, I guess we'll all be definitely watching out for what happens in that particular area in these times of COVID-19. Switching gears a bit now, move to Donald. What has been your most memorable or proudest or embarrassing moment in your career?
Oh, embarrassing. Now you've caught me there. This is, I've got to say, an absolutely amazing career. Before I joined the U.S. Foreign Service, I worked in civil society. Worked with a range of NGOs there. And one of the interesting things about our Foreign Service is you can actually join up to, I think it's age 59. In the US, it's all based on an exam that you take. And I know later there may be some questions about, you know, how one gets into this business, and we could talk about that more later. But my whole career, you know, I've had interesting, I've had fun, I've had funny, I've had scary experiences. I've been in Baghdad where I've been, you know, lying underneath my bed listening to rockets explode outside on Easter morning. That was under the scary heading. But if I look at just the last year here in Australia, and just pull 2 or 3 highlights from the year. In the last year, and remember people, you all think that being a diplomat means that we're walking around sipping champagne in tuxedos and talking to other people in tuxedos and evening gowns. It's not always that. In the last year, I have gone snorkeling on an island in the Great Barrier Reef with a group of students, Torres Strait and Aboriginal students, who we were funding an opportunity for them to study marine science with James Cook University. I have flown on an aircraft with your Prime Minister and my ambassador to a US aircraft carrier in the middle of the Coral Sea for Prime Minister Morrison to give a speech to the crew of the USS Ronald Reagan. And bizarrely, I've ridden in the back of a convertible Cadillac in Parks dressed as Elvis during the Parks Elvis Festival, something that we provide a little bit of support to, because what can be cooler than having 20 to 25,000 people descend on Parks, New South Wales in the middle of January to celebrate an icon of American culture, Elvis Presley. So I couldn't resist it. I put on the sideburns and the sunglasses and got to ride with one of the many Priscillas in the parade through the middle of Parks. Sorry, I haven't given you anything embarrassing other than maybe the Elvis thing.
Thank you, Donald. I would love to actually see the Elvis festival in real life. I think it would be a memorable event.
I have no idea if they're going to be able to hold it next January, but I would highly endorse it. I was a cynic when people recommended it to me, and it was one of the funnest things I've done in a long, long time.
We'll have to make the trip out there if it's on next year. Thank you all for answering those pre-submitted questions. So now we're going to switch to those questions that you guys may have now, opening the floor to the audience essentially. So just reminding you again, as I said at the beginning of the event, if you wish to have an audio question, to speak your question, just use the raise hand function. Alternatively, if you don't feel like doing that, that's fine. Just pop your questions down in the chat box below and we'll go through them accordingly. So yeah, it's open to you guys. Okay. All right. So I am now opening the floor to Taj. He has an audio question. I'm just unmuting you now, Taj. You should be able to speak. Hello? Sorry. Bit of technical difficulties here. Sorry.
I think he may have to unmute after you unmute. I think there's a double unmute.
Okay, I'll click unmute. Taj.
Okay. Hi.
Perfect.
That's working. Thanks, Samantha.
No
Quick
problem.
one. Unemployment. When the United States has incredibly high unemployment, Australia ends up having incredibly high unemployment. Youth unemployment in particular, what's the US doing in response to the imminent youth unemployment crisis as a result of COVID? And kind of what can we take here in Australia and what can we learn as a result of what the US is doing in response to youth unemployment as a result of this crisis? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
That's a really good question, and it's an excellent point. Something that I take very personally, given that I have a 20-year-old son who is a university student. He's at Brown University and was doing a semester abroad in Moscow. We got him out of Moscow literally the day that they closed the borders, so he barely made it out. And he's now living on his own back in Rhode Island and wondering what he's going to do all summer, because he had been hoping to have a paid internship or find a job, and chances are pretty slim that there will be a lot of opportunities right now. In terms of US approaches to looking at the larger unemployment program, to my knowledge, they haven't broken it out yet between youth and others, because the unemployment issue is so big on its own, with millions of Americans going in and registering for unemployment benefits. It's a huge challenge. Our Congress has been actively working on the employment question with the stimulus package, trying to get money flowing out to businesses in order to keep them afloat and allow them to pay their bills and survive long enough for the economy to pick up again, with the idea then that the jobs come back and or are maintained. This really is an unprecedented situation that some of our best economic minds are grappling with right now, because it's the larger question of, we have to protect the health, but at the same time, the economy is suffering, and there is a balance there because ultimately, if the economy tanks, that will have long-term negative impacts as well, but health does come first. So it is a huge challenge. I would give compliments to Australia and the way that authorities here have come together on those two topics and really worked hard in order to implement the health regulations and get the numbers down, which they have been coming down significantly, so that they can now look at the other issues, the economic issues and others. We're behind a little bit where Australia is in terms of bringing our numbers down, but I hope very much we'll get there soon. It is a really important question. And Mike said, I don't know if, Donald, if you want to add anything to that one, or Elizabeth?
I was just going to say, I know that this is sort of a live topic, both in the United States and here, in terms of unemployment. And I know in the United States, one of the things that they're looking at in order to ramp up employment and get the economy going is significant investments in infrastructure. So I think when we see government stimulus used positively, it can have a huge impact on getting people back to work. But it's going to be an issue that not only Australia and the United States, but every country that's been impacted by COVID-19 will be grappling with.
Did you have anything to add to that, Elizabeth? Or?
No, I think my colleagues have covered it very well.
Perfect. All right, thank you for your question, Taj. I'll just move on to another audio question from Marcel. I will just unmute you now.
Okay, can you hear me? Or?
Yes. Hi, Marcel.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Marcel. My question is to the Consul General. So I want to ask about trade because I'm the acting director for international trade for my family company. We are in the agriculture sector. Even before the COVID-19 happened, with Donald Trump as the president of the United States, there's a lot of criticism with how he is playing a economic warfare with a lot of people. It has impacted a lot of trade, especially for Malaysia, as well as for Singapore. The worst will be the currency exchange as well. It has like fluctuated up and down, and it really destabilized the Malaysian economy in terms of how we trade with other countries. When you let's say, because we are currently working with Tim Welsh from USA Pauses in Bangkok. He's the former staff with the US Embassy here in Bangkok. And trade has been very, very difficult even before COVID-19. Like I said, there's a lot of criticisms from the Malaysian Chinese community. I was born in Malaysia. I'm an ethnic Chinese, 6th generation Chinese in Malaysia. There's a lot of criticism towards the US for playing politics and for disturbing or stirring up the pot, stir up the economic trade in Asia. And then secondly, with regarding China, like I said, I'm not a pro-Chinese communist. I'm more of a Kuomintang supporter from Taiwan. With the COVID-19, actually, I think the US should have known that with the Belt and Road Initiative, like if you look at the figures for the WHO, US is the largest contributor to the WHO, and then China's funding is only about 70 million plus. So I find it strange that how is China able to manipulate the WHO? Because the more money you put in, the more influence you have. Just like the IMF, where US has the largest voting rights in the IMF. And I think we forget that with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the WHO director is from Ethiopia. As you know, China is heavily investing a lot of money into African continent. So I think we kind of forget that, China, with the Belt and Road Initiative, when you swing the money in front of someone, right? When you swing money in front of a politician in Ethiopia, they'll look at money. Oh, okay, yeah, I will listen to you. That is what China is actually doing. If you think about it with the COVID-19, with like I said, the director of WHO is Ethiopian. So that's why, how come the US has not mentioned about that in the news, or the President Trump has not even mentioned anything about the Belt and Road Initiative? Could be the cause of how the WHO was very quiet about the COVID-19. You cannot let a superpower like China, because China right now, like you talk about trade, it is very bad right now.
Sorry, Marcel, to cut you off there.
Yes, okay, yeah.
What was the question that you were going to ask? Sorry, I didn't quite grab that. Or were you still going? Sorry.
No, I was just saying, like, how is it that the US has not seen the clear picture of what the Belt and Road Initiative has impacted this COVID-19, especially on the WHO? That is one question. Number two is regarding the trade war. Why does the US want to conduct a trade war with other people? Because it's affecting trade. Like people are suffering, economically speaking. So do you think that trade war is not the ideal way of how you counter China? There should be another different way of doing it. That's all.
Thank you, Marcel.
Great.
Let
me start with the trade question first. We don't like to use the word, the military words, let's say, when it comes to this. The US and China have had ongoing trade negotiations, and our complaints about the way in which China treats our companies and does business with the United States have been going on for many, many years. And so this is not something that only began with the current administration and President Trump. But I will say that President Trump came into office, he was elected on a very strong platform regarding renegotiating our trading arrangements with China. And this is something that gets a lot of traction in the United States. I will say, whether you're talking about businesses, you're talking about politics on both sides of the aisle, or you're talking about a lot of average Americans. There is very much a sense that the United States economy has suffered because our trading and business relationship with China has not progressed in the way that we feel it should have, given the growth and the development of the Chinese economy. China to this day maintains a status in certain international fora and with regards to certain international agreements of being in its developmental stage, which it is not. The Chinese economy is large, it is successful, and we believe that they should be operating on the world platform from that point of view. In addition to the fact that when a foreign company, and here we speak for American companies, when they go to do business in China, they should be treated the way a Chinese company is treated in the United States. In the United States, a Chinese company can come in, they can make investments, they can do things based on contracts and know that the contracts will be respected in a court of law. They know that their intellectual property will be protected that they don't have to fear that it will be stolen and suddenly there will be a new competitor. Those are the things our companies face in China. And our companies have been facing these for a long time, for many years now. The Chinese require, for example, that when a US company goes in, or an Australian company, they will have to get a local business partner, and that business partner will own a certain percentage and have a certain amount of control and will very likely have full access to whatever the secret is, the intellectual property of that company that makes them special. And what we have seen is that the rules have shifted in many cases over time, where the partner ends up owning more and more of the local entity, or the partner then takes the intellectual property and leaves and becomes the major competitor and pushes the American company out of the market completely. So these various things that we have said no more. The Trump administration very clearly wants American companies to do business in China, but to be able to do business with the protections and the even playing field that we give to Chinese companies. And so that is why the negotiations have started. To your point about the impact of it, our negotiations are just between the United States and China. You're absolutely right. There are impacts outside of China, et cetera. We are very concerned about relationships throughout the rest of the region. We think that's extremely important. We also believe that in working with the Chinese and to create a better business environment there, that it will benefit others. And that in the long run, this will be good for all the companies. I have had meetings here in Sydney with Australian business people who have told me point blank that they've had to pull out of China because of these same problems, and they're no longer doing business there or only selling things. So in other words, they are doing business with China, but not doing business in China. I've also had a meeting with a fabulous Australian company who has a very unique product. They are going into the Chinese market and building a factory there. And they have calculated, they think they'll have a certain number of years before their intellectual property is gone. And that's really sad. It shouldn't be that way. So that's regarding our relationship on trade. In terms of the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, this is something which we also look at from the point of view of Belt and Road throughout this region, and what's Chinese loans to developing countries to build big infrastructure projects. We are concerned that these projects oftentimes are not necessary. And so part of our Indo-Pacific strategy in working in this region is to help countries to be able to make assessments about what do they really need. Do they actually really need a super fancy airport with multiple runways? Is there a market? Will they actually have the flights coming in? Just because it is handed to you in a prepackaged way that looks really good doesn't mean you necessarily need that amount of infrastructure. So making smart decisions, because these are not aid projects, these are loans, and they will have to be repaid. And if they don't get repaid, then the people making the loans, Chinese entities, will come in and take over those infrastructure projects and own a chunk of your country. So that is our concern when we get out and we talk about having our strategy. We talk to countries saying, listen, you have to make smart decisions. And we support you making those smart decisions, and we would like to assist you in making an assessment. What is it that you really need? And then why don't you look at other options for investment? We are talking to US and Australian private sector companies to say, listen, how about you make the investment, make them an offer. And then when you have choices, you can get the best deal for your country.
Thank you, Consul General, and thank you, Marcel, for your question. I'll move now just to a written question that was provided by Olivia. So she kind of extends this to any one of the panelists tonight. She wants to know if you guys could tell us more about any types of entry-level roles or graduate positions that may be available to Australians who want to work in the US alliance space.
Turn that over to my colleagues. They've got some great stuff in their offices.
Sure, I'll give you a little space to breathe, Consul General. There is a wide range of opportunities that I have seen since I've been here in Sydney, and in fact, possibly more. Well, I saw quite a few in Paris when I was there as well. But I have seen young Australians working with the American Chamber of Commerce. We occasionally have Australian interns that have worked at our embassy and at our consulates. That's not an ongoing program, but watch our websites and our social media to see when those opportunities come up. I know quite a few young Australians that are affiliated with, working with, or taking part in programs at the United States Study Center over at the University of Sydney. But we've also had the Consul General go out and speak to students at Macquarie University at Wollongong, up in Queensland and Brisbane. I suppose the speaking opportunities aren't the same as these worker internship opportunities. But I think there is space to get involved, and some of it also is in the nonprofit sector. Getting involved with organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, or the whole range, even faith-based organizations that touch on, if not alliance issues, touch on the democracy issues, touch on the policy issues that we share. So I think there's opportunity. It's not always easy. The Consul General mentioned her son who's at Brown University. I have a daughter who has her master's degree in international development and is desperately trying to get her toe in the door working in that field. But I think if you just keep banging on the door, I would recommend get onto LinkedIn. It's a great opportunity to find out about what's going on in this space. Elizabeth, any other tips from your side?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that it's also a good idea for Australians to look at opportunities that are located within the US. There are a lot of organizations operating on that side. And there is a special visa just for not young, but Australians of any age who find a job in the US, have a commitment from an employer to employ them, and they can go work temporarily for several years in the United States on this special visa. It's called an E3 visa. And it's quite easy to meet the requirements once you have a job offer in hand. You can find information about the E3 visa on our website, and it's a good way to get some international experience to get into the U.S. and really work a little more in that direct people-to-people relationship.
I might also add one thing that I know. There's a special program for young Australians to go work in the U.S. Congress. And I would highly recommend looking into that because that's a fascinating experience. I myself spent a year working for a US senator as part of an exchange program that we do every year between the State Department and offices on the Hill. The US Congress has a special role in international relations, and it impacts on many aspects of it, whether it's the funding or the actual foreign policy or the military side or the business policy side. So I would recommend that you all take a look at that if you're interested, because I've heard really good feedback in terms of going into a US congressman's office and being an active part of that staff and learning a lot about the United States and how we work in Washington.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for all those awesome tips. I'm sure our audience got some great insight into how they can get into the field. So switching gears again back into a more pertinent issue at the moment that's kind of occurring concurrently with the coronavirus. So we have a written question from Harrison, and he asks, how is America pressuring Saudi Arabia to reduce the oversaturation of oil in the international market and bring it to a more balanced cost, especially given the massive drop of use during COVID-19?
Yes. I know what you're talking about. Donald, have you been following this issue more closely?
So this is the question, if I caught it right, what are we doing to
Saudi
to stop production of oil or to lower prices? Which one was it?
The price can't get much lower.
Yeah, I know. When oil was trading at negative $36 a barrel the other day. No, I know I haven't followed this closely, and this is one of the things about working as a diplomat. When you're posted overseas, or indeed when you're in Washington in a particular bureau or section, you tend to get pretty laser focused on your issues and your part of the world. So here I probably know about as much about this issue as your questioner, because they're probably reading about it in the press. I have seen President Trump talking about conversations that he's had with the Saudis about lowering oil prices. If we get into, and I am not an economist, and if my colleagues from our economic section are listening in, I apologize here for pretending I am. But if we look at oil production in the United States, we became oil independent recently with massive increases of oil production in the United States through use of new techniques and new technologies. But that oil is more expensive to extract than the oil that's coming out of Saudi Arabia and out of Russia right now. And so this has had a serious impact on the United States economy and on US oil producers. And so our Department of Commerce, Treasury, the White House have looked at this situation and have talked to the Saudis and to others, I believe, to get them to reduce production so that the market isn't glutted, because we have this combination of a glutted market and a lack of demand as people are shut down and staying home.
Which is huge.
Yeah, and our strategic reserve in the United States is at capacity. So there's not the opportunity for the government to buy more oil from local producers.
Yeah. One thing I would jump in, I find this whole topic of energy to be absolutely fascinating. And so for the questioner and anyone else, if you are considering trying to specialize in a certain aspect of international relations, I think energy policy is incredibly important and is only becoming more and more interesting and more dynamic. It's very much an intersection of geopolitics and natural resources and business, which makes it that much more interesting. The whole situation with the oil has been so dynamic in recent years, given the United States' rise to become the #1 oil producer through fracking. And so that has shifted the balance of power, and then OPEC working more closely with the Russians, but it obviously recently not working in the way that they were anticipating. And then with the shutdown, especially of airline travel and demand dropping out of the market, it's an interesting inflection point for where that whole industry is going to go in the future, in parallel with the fact that we have these major climate issues on the table and more development of renewable sources, a lot of public interest across the world in renewable sources. One of our major companies here in Australia is General Electric, and GE is a major global producer of wind turbines and has been putting in wind farms all around Australia. I'm actually hoping to go and visit one of them and cut the ribbon on one of the larger ones that they have just recently finished installing up in Queensland. So all of that is happening at the same time, and the extent to which any of you become experts in it and really learn the business and understand the complexities of it, I think you would build a brilliant career, and it would be very beneficial for the world.
Thank you, Consul General. I think we have, I'm just looking at the time, I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up for this evening. And I'll go to Anet, which is a live audio question. So I'll just unmute you now, Anet. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
My question is directed towards Sharon and Elizabeth. As a young woman who is interested in getting into international affairs, it often seems quite daunting because women aren't generally expected to be the people to move their families around the world. How did you deal with the challenges? And do you have any advice for young women wanting to go into foreign affairs?
Elizabeth, why don't you go first and I'll go second?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I have been married for 1 year longer than I have been in the Foreign Service. And my husband and I have 3 children, and he last worked a full-time paying job 3 months before our oldest child was born, and he has been home with the children ever since. So we have a pretty unconventional marriage and family situation, and it has been a challenge, particularly in some of the places we've lived where that was extremely unusual, like Lesotho or Nigeria or South Africa, where that kind of setup almost doesn't exist. I think in some ways, as an American, we can kind of get away with being unconventional in that sense. It wasn't a problem for me living in those cultures necessarily because I was already somebody different. I've heard my colleagues who speak about being a woman in a society where women are not allowed to do many things, like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, where their public life is very restricted. They're viewed almost as quasi-men in that scenario. So in some ways, being a diplomat as a woman with foreign interlocutors can be just the same, perhaps, or close to what our male colleagues experience. But there is a lot of pressure as a woman doing something unconventional. You have to be very confident in your choices. You have to have a partner if that's your choice, if that's part of your decision. Your partner has to be fully on board, and you have to be willing. I think this is particularly important for women who often face a greater challenge with imposter syndrome, not trusting their voices, or fear about being perceived as too aggressive. You have to be willing to speak up and take those risks, quash down the voice of imposter syndrome telling you that you're not good enough for the job or that you're not qualified enough for the job. You are, and you have to have that confidence, or at least fake it until you make it.
Yeah. I would just say I really appreciate how in my career, I've been able to stand on the shoulders of the women before me. And I think we really always need to look at those who came and struggled to become a real part of the institution. Because a State Department has some not very impressive history on that. My former passed away father-in-law was a diplomat, and at the time he actually was assigned to one of the civilian political management teams that was in Germany right after World War II, that got Germany up and going again, where the American sector was run by these American diplomats for a little while, and then proceeded career throughout the State Department, reaching ambassador. In that period, for the whole time, his wife received an evaluation for her performance as a spouse. And part of his evaluation every year as a diplomat was how his wife performed, which I think is outrageous. How she was with hosting receptions and showing up at events and, serving drinks and things like that. They did get away with that. There was also a policy. My understanding is it was unwritten, but it was quite strongly enforced for an unwritten, not formal policy, that when a female Foreign Service officer in, say, the early and mid 20th century, when they got married, they had to quit. They were just expected to hand in their resignation. You could not be a married female Foreign Service officer and continue with your career. Finally, someone challenged that in the early 70s, and the institution had to say, well, actually, it's not really a policy, and no, it can't be legally supported, and they got rid of it. But the pressure was intense. And so I came in and benefited from the fact that there were a number of strong women that pushed back on that. All of that being said, we still do not have the representation that we should have, especially at the more senior levels. And it is hard. You do have to make trade-offs. So my husband has also not had a consistent career. He decided to do a PhD, which he was able to do on his own, and that's worked out pretty well. He's just recently received a fellowship, and we were looking at a separation because the fellowship is at a think tank in Washington, D.C., and they wanted him to move there to do the fellowship, which he was going to do, and I would stay here with our daughters. We have 2 year 9 daughters. But actually, because of COVID, the fellowship has gone online. So luckily he is staying here, but he still gets to do research and participate in the fellowship. But it's hard. There's definitely challenges, and you have trade-offs, which you would have in a lot of different international careers.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth and Consul General, for answering that question. So I guess that's it for this evening. We've kind of run out of time. I'd like to extend a massive thank you to all our panelists this evening. Thank you so much for answering everybody's questions and providing your insights into the career, the big, massive, interesting career that is foreign policy and international affairs. And I'd also like to extend a massive thank you to all our attendees this evening. It was great to have you here in these interesting times, that is Zoom meetups. When you do log off, I will say that there is a survey that pops up at the end once you log up. We would really appreciate it if you could fill that out to assist us in improving on these virtual events. And in addition, in that survey link, there's also a registration link to the next US Consulate General event, which will be occurring next Tuesday at May 5th at 11 a.m., which is Learn at Lunch Press Freedom Day. So within this event, you'll be able to grab some food and learn from former investigative journalists and the importance of freedom of speech. So yeah, thank you all and have a lovely evening.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you everybody for joining us.